And there on your screen, you can see the cars that will transport the crew back after they egress have arrived to the pad, and teams are standing by there.
And we do have the closeout team waiting for the elevator that will take them all the way up to that crew access arm. Again, that's the same team that helped them ingress into the vehicle. It'll be the same team to help them egress.
And there you can see them making their way up. And they did call the scrub right before that crew access arm normally would have swung out of the way. So we didn't have to wait for that to swing back. So it does speed up the process a little bit. And that was, I think, very intentional to make a decision at that point.
Yeah, exactly. We have a lot of checkpoints through the countdown, all purposefully to make sure that we are making sure that every step of the process we are good before we proceed. And again, just like Anna was saying, this is exactly why we do that. We were able to make this call prior to propellant loading, prior to removing the crew access arm, making the steps to almost go backwards a little bit easier and a little bit safer. We are doing, you can see on your screen, just making sure that we are good to open that hatch for Dragon.
And again, Crew-10 is the 10th rotational mission for SpaceX carrying crew to the International Space Station. Their crew currently inside Dragon that will egress soon is comprised of 2 NASA astronauts, so NASA astronaut Anne McClain and Nichole Ayers, as well as a JAXA astronaut, Takuya Onishi, and a Roscosmos cosmonaut, Kirill Peskov. And then once we do have a new launch date and a launch time and we get the crew off the pad and into orbit, they will have a long duration mission at the International Space Station conducting science and research activities.
It's really great to see the crew in good spirits. They train for this and, spend a lot of hours working through each one of these procedures, and you can see the closeout team making their way across the crew access arm there over to the White Room. But yeah, this is all part of procedure, and it's really great to see the crew just in good spirits, despite unfortunately not being able to launch today. But we will have some other opportunities, and again, we will not launch unless we know that we can launch safely and reliably. And this is exactly why we do all of these checks throughout the countdown.
And really, everything has to go right for a launch to be successful. So we want to take the time and make sure we understand any issues that arise. Along with all of the engineering systems on the rocket and Dragon, we also have to look out for things like weather to make sure we're safe to fly and launch into orbit. So again, the teams will continue discussing the hydraulics issue, continue looking at the weather for the next few days, and see when our next launch opportunity may be. You're continuing to see a live look inside the Dragon Endurance. Again, this was going to be the 4th flight of that spacecraft. It previously flew on Crew-3, Crew-5, and Crew-7. Live look there at the launch pad, Launch Complex 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, as the sun looks like it's pretty much fully set at this point. And there are teams continuing to go down the crew access arm, safing the hatch and getting ready to open it so that they can begin the egress or exit operations for the crew and get them out one by one.
Crew-10, again, there on your screen, patiently waiting for that hatch to open. Once that hatch opens, they'll egress 1 crew member at a time. And again, they still need to follow, ensuring that we are not bringing any FOD in or into the Dragon spacecraft, and the crew arm itself. And so you saw the closeouts team in those closeout suits there.
Correct, SpaceX. The closeout team is in the White Room. They're doing final preparations for hatch opening, expected in just a few minutes from now.
SpaceX, Dragon copy.
That was the core speaking with the crew, just providing an update. They are inside of Dragon, so they can't see outside from the seats that they're in. So the core is just letting them know that the closeout team is inside of the crew access arm, inside of the White Room, and preparing to open that hatch shortly.
And confirming those calls on the crew side is the commander for Crew-10, Anne McClain. She's in the center right of your screen. So from left to right on your screen, you have Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov, NASA astronaut Nichole Ayers, NASA astronaut Anne McClain, and then JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi. And that scrub was called about 45 minutes ago now, continuing to work through those procedures to get the crew egressed from the spacecraft. The launch for today was planned for 7:48 p.m. Eastern, 4:48 p.m. Pacific. And they called that scrub about 45 minutes ahead of that instantaneous launch window.
Again, if you're just now joining us, we did have a scrub for the Crew-10 launch today. Once again, the vehicle and the crew are safe and healthy. The scrub was called for a ground side issue with the hydraulic system that opens the access arm around the vehicle which is attached to the I'm sorry, not the access arm, the clamp arm on the transporter erector. And the countdown is exactly what we use. This is the framework that the launch team uses to make sure that all final checks are made in the right order to make sure that we have a safe flight and a safe launch. And what's happening during these countdowns is the rocket computers, the ground computers, the launch teams are all monitoring the checks along the way, making sure that every step of the way, all the way to T0, as well as all the way through launch, that everything is healthy and operating nominally. And so we were going through those procedures today. And as we were working through each one of those checks, we did notice that there was an issue with the hydraulic system on the clamp arm. And teams began to work through that, trying to see if we could resolve it in time for the expected T0 today. Unfortunately, around, I believe, T minus 45 minutes is when they made the official call. Again, that was about 8 minutes before, or 10 minutes before we load propellants onto the vehicle. And again, this is why all these checks are there. This is what terminal count is for, is to make sure that the vehicle is safe, and that we can make a call in time to prevent going through unnecessary procedures as well. So again, we didn't load propellants on the vehicle. That does make this egress a little bit easier, a little bit faster for the crew.
And that clamp arm that we keep referencing, so those clamp arms are on the transporter erector that the Falcon 9 is on top of, and they are located around the second stage of Falcon 9. There you can see them on your screen right above the lower thirds. And they stay around the second stage of the Falcon 9 until we have the strong back retract, which takes place in the final minutes of the countdown around the T-minus 4.5 minute mark.
Exactly, and the purpose of the transporter erector, the strong back, is we have the propellant lines, avionics, umbilicals attached to the vehicle. It also provides support and brings the vehicle vertical for launch. And just about 4.5, 5 minutes before T0 is when we open up those clamp arms, move the TE just a couple degrees away from the vehicle to prepare for liftoff, and then at T0, the TE moves even further away to clear the way for the vehicle as it lifts off. And so, unfortunately, we had an issue with the clamp arm. It wouldn't have been potentially able to open up fully. So the teams are working through whatever that issue, that root cause of that issue is, to make sure that when we do go for launch, those clamp arms will fully open and will clear the way for the TE to be able to recline appropriately for liftoff.
And there you're getting a great 360 view of the launch pad. You can see some of the other launch complexes in the background as well. Again, it's a very active launch area down in Florida. Launches are constantly happening. This one was scheduled to take place from Launch Complex 39A there on your screen. And you can see Falcon 9 standing tall with Dragon atop, with Crew-10 currently inside as they work through those egress procedures with the SpaceX team. Again, there is a lot of coordination that went into today's preparations leading up to the final minutes before we scrubbed. Communication between the NASA teams, the SpaceX teams, everyone is working to make sure we're all on the same page, we're all comfortable and ready to launch. And of course, we'll launch once everything is in tip-top shape and we're ready to go fly the crew to the International Space Station.
And again, the crew has gone through these procedures many, many times. There's a lot of rehearsals. There's a lot of review of all the vehicle systems prior to flight, testing, simulations that the crew works through in preparation for a launch to the International Space Station. So all of these, the crew did go through several of these before. We did a dry dress rehearsal. This is almost just like a second dry dress rehearsal for them. And when the vehicle is ready, I'm sure the crew will be ready to go and excited to go to the International Space Station.
Practice makes perfect, so the more practice, the better, really.
Exactly.
And the crew, there you can see on the right hand of your screen, they've been training for their mission to the International Space Station for well over a year now, getting ready for all of the different science and maintenance activities that they will do on board once they make it to the International Space Station. Once on board the International Space Station, they will complete a brief handover period with the Crew-9 crew that is currently orbiting on the International Space Station. Once that handover period is complete and the weather looks good, Crew-9 will return home, splashing down off the coast of Florida, bringing it into their mission. And again, this is part of the rotational crew missions that we do to the International Space Station about every 6 months or so as part of NASA's Commercial Crew Program.
Anna, you mentioned the science that they do. So preparing for a launch is just only a very small portion of what they're training for. They're preparing to do a lot of science experiments, and 6 months is a very long time for them to get a lot of work done on the orbiting laboratory.
Yep, and the International Space Station will actually celebrate its 25th year of continuous human presence this year. And in that time, there have been thousands of experiments conducted in microgravity. And that microgravity environment in low Earth orbit really provides a unique environment for science and research technology demonstrations that just can't be done here on Earth. And some of those science and research activities that the crew is planning to conduct includes a thermally assisted material flammability test to understand fire growth and reaction in microgravity. And this research could contribute to future spacecraft and facility designs. They'll also engage with students worldwide via ham radio. And researchers from that investigation recently launched related science to the moon aboard Firefly's Blue Ghost, aiming to bridge current navigation systems with emerging lunar-specific technologies. And then the astronauts there on your screen themselves also serve as test subjects. So we have NASA's Human Research Program that does a multitude of different human studies on the crew themselves. And one of those studies that began a couple of years ago is known as CIPHER. So one of the crew members is part of that human research study to provide valuable insights for future deep space missions. But again, that's just a sampling of the more than 200 different investigations that they will participate in and help researchers on Earth conduct while they complete their mission at the International Space Station in low Earth orbit. Again, the launch of Crew-10, which you can see that crew on the right-hand side of your screen, comprised of NASA astronauts Anne McClain, Nichole Ayers, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. That launch for today that was originally planned for 7:48 p.m. Eastern, 4:48 p.m. Pacific was scrubbed with about 45 minutes left in the countdown right before the crew access arm was planned to retract. It was scrubbed due to a hydraulics ground issue related to the clamp arm, which is holding, there are two clamp arms holding the Falcon 9 rocket in place on the launch pad aboard the transporter erector. Those clamp arms are located around the second stage of the Falcon 9, which you can see there now on your screen. After that launch scrub was called, the teams immediately began working through processes to egress the crew from the spacecraft, but the pad team had already left the pad, so they had to drive back out. They have since arrived to the launch pad, and they are up in that crew access arm that you can see on your screen that is connected to the Dragon spacecraft at the top of the Falcon 9 rocket. And so they are working to safe the hatch around the Dragon Endurance spacecraft. Once all that safing is complete, they will open the hatch and begin to get the crew out one by one before they take them back to the crew quarters at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So leading up to today's launch attempts, the crew actually ingressed or entered the spacecraft around 4:58 p.m. Eastern, so several hours ago now. There you can see the ground crew team currently working on those hatch safing and opening operations.
Dragon SpaceX closeout team is preparing for side hatch open in just about a minute or so.
Dragon copy.
And again, some comms from the core here in Mission Control at SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, communicating with the crew, just letting them know that the closeout team is there outside, just right outside of the hatch, working on opening that hatch for them. Again, they're still inside of the Dragon spacecraft, and there you can see them in their seats. So they can't see what's going on outside of the vehicle, which is why the core is there to help communicate. They might be hearing some noises from the closeout team working on opening that hatch. This allows them to just know and understand what to expect, that those noises that they're hearing is expected, and that they can anticipate that hatch opening here shortly. And the crew there using their pads that they would use during their flight. Those tablets hold their procedures, so they can, if they're wondering where, what they need to work through, what's coming up next in the procedure, they can look there on those tablets very easily. They were also taking some selfies earlier. Maybe some good memories of what's leading up to their future launch to the International Space Station.
You got to make the most of it, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
And the two of the crew members there on your screen are veteran astronauts, so they've flown previously. So Anne McClain as well as Takuya Onishi have both been to the International Space Station before, so I'm sure they're familiar with launch scrubs and all the procedures and processes that go into that.
Again, this is exactly why, we go through a countdown. We have automated checks. We have automated checks. We have manual checks. We have a whole team in mission control here in Hawthorne that monitor the vehicle and all of its systems to make sure that everything is good, that we have a team monitoring all the ground systems to ensure everything is good. Again, if we are not 100% sure that we are safe, that we can launch safely and reliably, we will call a hold on a launch just like we did today, and we will wait until we are ready with another backup opportunity, hopefully in the next day or two.
And again, there are several other opportunities this week. The earliest is tomorrow, about 24 hours from now. But again, waiting for confirmation from the NASA and SpaceX teams on when they will schedule that next opportunity, whether it's tomorrow or sometime later this week or even next. And there on your screen, you can see the closeout team. It looks like they're beginning to work to open the hatch. And then once the hatch is open, the crew will begin exiting one by one with some assistance from those ground teams. And just by the number of people you can see on your screen there, you can see just how big of an operation it is to launch people.
Dragon SpaceX, stand by for side hatch open.
SpaceX Dragon, copy.
And Dragon SpaceX, hatch is open, so we'll be handing you off to the closeout team for egress. Sorry we couldn't get you off today, but we'll speak to you soon and look forward to trying it again.
SpaceX Dragon, we copy. We see the closeout crew. Great working with you today. Kudos to the whole team. I know it was a lot of work to try to get it to go, but like I said earlier, we'll be ready when the equipment is.
And there you heard some nice words from NASA astronaut, the commander of Crew-10, Anne McClain, talking about the scrub, but also talking about how grateful they are for all of the teams and the work that they've put into today's opportunity, even though it didn't go as they planned. But again, there are additional opportunities that will be available once the teams work through those ground issues on the hydraulic system for the clamp arms. And again, we also heard and saw on our screen a moment ago that the hatch for the Dragon spacecraft Endurance has now been opened. So those closeout team members will begin removing the crew members from their seat one by one. And then from there, the crew will go down and get into their vehicles and be taken back to crew quarters.
When that hatch opened, they waved to the closeout team. This is a team that they've been working with for many, many months, so they're very familiar with each other. And as Anna, you were mentioning, there's a lot of teams involved with a launch like this. Several teams helping to make a crew launch like this happen. The closeout team working with the crew side by side, obviously the crew itself, the operations team that helps train the crew for launch. Then there's a lot of training with NASA for the science. So there's several teams that are involved with a mission like today's, and it's okay that we're not going today. We will go when every single one of those teams is ready to go.
Yep, and we also have the SpaceX Mission Control here in Hawthorne, as well as NASA's Mission Control team for the International Space Station in Houston, Texas, as well as the launch control teams in Florida. So really a huge undertaking to launch humans to space successfully. And we've been launching people now to the International Space Station for almost 25 years, with that 25th anniversary of continuous human presence coming up later this year.
Yeah, and NASA astronauts have been flying with SpaceX for the past 5 years, since Demo 2 in May of 2020. And this will be the 10th rotational crew mission, making the 11th with NASA and SpaceX.
Yep. And those crew rotations, they're also intricately timed. So the crews typically spend around 6 months aboard the International Space Station once they get up there. So the current crew rotation that's up there is Crew-9, which was the 9th rotational crew mission for SpaceX flying NASA astronauts to the International Space Station. And once Crew-10 launches and gets to dock to the International Space Station, they'll complete that handover period with Crew-9 before Crew-9 makes their way back to Earth. And then there on your screen, you can see the Crew-10 crew members working to get their hands free out of their launch and entry suits.
Yeah, these suits are intravehicular suits. They are designed for being inside of the spacecraft only. They help keep the astronauts cool. It's almost like they have a mini self AC system, but it also helps protect the crew in case of a cabin depressurization during a launch. So they're not going to egress those, or egress. I mean, the suits are kind of like a miniature spacecraft, but they won't be getting out of their suits now, but they are just getting their hands free so that they can help safely climb out of their seats and out of the spacecraft.
And typically, once we launch and the crew is safely inserted into orbit, the crew will often get out of those suits for the phasing ride as they catch up to the International Space Station to get a little bit more comfortable, since that can be sometimes a lengthy ride. If we had launched today, it was actually on the shorter end for phasing. It would have been about 10 hours to get to the International Space Station. And there we see a live look of Launch Complex 39A in Florida. It looks like the sun has fully set. And we now have one of the crew members of Crew-10 out of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft, another following right behind. And it looks like those are the two mission specialists for Crew-10, so JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. They are now safely out of the Dragon spacecraft, followed there by NASA astronaut Nichole Ayers. And then last but not least, making her way out of the Dragon spacecraft is NASA astronaut Anne McClain.
Must be nice for them to be able to stretch their legs after the last few hours sitting in the Dragon spacecraft. They are now currently in the White Room, but they'll be making their way down this crew access arm here in a moment. And again, the closeout team is there to help assist the crew, make sure they, as they were egressing the spacecraft, that they didn't damage their suits, helmets, and making sure that the crew is safe while they're in their spacesuits. These are some pretty hefty spacesuits, so might not be as easy to walk around in like normal clothes. So that's what the crew is there to help with. They're also going to make sure that the vehicle is safe before they exit the crew arm as well.
It looks like they're now making their way down the crew access arm, well away from the spacecraft that they just egressed or exited following that launch scrub. Again, the scrub was called with about 45 minutes left in the launch count when we were targeting a 7:48 p.m. Eastern liftoff. That scrub was due to a ground hydraulics issue with the clamp arm on the transporter erector that the Falcon 9 sits atop. And those clamp arms hold the Falcon 9 in place and typically retract in terminal count. And the crew will now begin to make their way down to the base of the launch pad, where they will then get into the vehicles that brought them here several hours ago and return to crew quarters. Once they're back at crew quarters, they'll likely have some meetings with some of the SpaceX and NASA teams to talk future opportunities for their launch.
Crew-10 members making their way downstairs. This is where they will get access to the elevator that will take them down the tower to the base of the tower to their Teslas that will take them back to their crew quarters. Looks like several members of the closeout team are following right behind them.
They're getting into the elevator that'll take them down to their vehicles, and then they will drive off back to crew quarters at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And there you're seeing a live look of those vehicles standing by for them. Again, they've been standing by since the closeout team arrived about 45 minutes ago. After the launch scrub was called, there were a few minutes that we had to wait for the closeout team to make their way back, since they had already left the launch pad prior to that scrub being called. Once the closeout team made their way back, they then went up to the crew access arm and began safing the hatch to then egress the crew. The Crew-10 crew members comprised of NASA astronauts Anne McClain, Nichole Ayers, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. And there you see them all on your screen as they are making their way down. They've made their way down and are going to enter into their vehicles and leave the launch pad and go back to crew quarters shortly.
Yeah, they're going to get into their Teslas. These Teslas are special made for the crew, where they have the ability to attach their umbilicals to help keep cool air flowing through their suits. Once they enter those Teslas, again, they'll make their way back down to their crew quarters, where they will stay quarantined until they have their next launch opportunity. And there you can see the crew now ingressing those vehicles. And that's going to wrap it up for us here in Hawthorne, California at SpaceX here at next to Mission Control. We're going to send it back over to Daryl at KSC to follow the crew the rest of the way. Again, it's unfortunate that we did not launch today, but again, always better to be safe and make sure that we launch when we're ready.
Yep, and we'll continue to provide updates on NASA's blog for the Commercial Crew program, as well as our social media accounts once we have that new launch time ready to share with the world. But for now, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here in Hawthorne, and we'll see you again soon once we have our next launch attempt for the Crew-10 mission. And with that, we'll hand it back over to Daryl at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
All right, thank you both, ladies, for walking us through the egress of the astronauts from their spacecraft down the launch tower and into their waiting vehicles. For those of you just now tuning in or happen to be catching up on what's happening, we are live at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, watching Crew-10 make their way back from a launch attempt at Complex 39A. They were scheduled to launch with a T0 of 7:48 and 57 seconds p.m. Eastern Time. However, the launch was scrubbed less than an hour before that due to an apparent hydraulic problem with the Launch Pad 39A Falcon 9 hold-down clamp arm system, the system that holds the rocket to the strong back. And so NASA and SpaceX teams made the decision to call off the launch for today. There you see the crew, along with the closeout crew, our crew of 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut, leaving their rocket for another day. So, of course, Jessica, the understanding is, with astronauts that they're always ready, but they got to be feeling some disappointment.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's a bit of a letdown when you think you're going to space and you don't. I didn't have that scrub experience myself, but obviously it is quite common for a lot of astronauts in the office. And I think really they're just mostly used to it from their previous careers. Like we mentioned earlier, Anne often talks about being humble and knowing that your equipment it's going to fail in the least predictable of ways, so you really just always need to be ready for anything. And that's what happened here today, despite a pretty flawless lead up. It was something that we didn't expect, but we will launch when we're ready and when we're safe, and of course that's always the most important thing when we're talking about human spaceflight. So maybe they'll have a little bit more time to relax and get ready for the next opportunity.
We're going to continue tracking the astronauts' progress back to the astronaut crew quarters, and then we will close out the broadcast. But we want to make sure that you, the viewer, see the astronauts making it back from the launch complex back to their crew quarters safely before we close it off.
And then it's a little bit like going home. Anne was talking earlier about the appreciating the home-cooked food, and we have an incredible staff there at the quarantine facility. So, hey, another day of that, probably some other family visits, and they'll find a way to make good use of that time now that they have all the annoying taskless stuff out of the way that they thought they had to complete before yesterday. From what I've heard, things do stay pretty busy right up until the last minute here. So, it is probably still a little bit stressful. You're trying to reply to those last emails and send those last text messages and keep people up to date and close out different questions that people are coming to you with. So this could be a nice relaxing day for them tomorrow.
Well, it's certainly beautiful outside, as you can see here, as we are in the late twilight of today, Wednesday, March 12th. It was a beautiful day all day long today. Pleasant temperatures outside. Boats were going by the launch pad. It was a quintessential Florida launch.
This is that kind of scene that I was talking about earlier when the cars were going in the other direction, and now at night it's even more dramatic with all of the lights and and the entourage leading them back. I wonder if they're playing their theme music again. Maybe not. Maybe this time they're kind of sitting in silence. And will they play the same songs on the next opportunity? That's another answer I'll have to find out.
Yeah. I mean, it's an opportunity to change up your playlist if you've got the time to do so. Historically speaking, when crews back in shuttle days were faced with delays that they knew were going to be long, they had use of the astronaut beach house, and there were opportunities to spend a little more time out there, and families were on hand. So
yeah, and there could be. We still do use the beach house in this pre-launch quarantine period where the astronauts will go out there with their families, and it's a really nice, iconic, idyllic, gorgeous setting. If you've ever seen it, nice access to the beach and to the ocean, and it just has that real beach house vibe that's pretty relaxing. So I'm not sure whether or not they'll get another opportunity to do that, but always a good option. Maybe a final run down the beach.
What I love the most about that beach house location is the solitude. It's the house and the way Florida looked before anything, came around. It's so natural. The only really significant thing that you see is towering launch pads off in the distance.
But we like that.
Yeah, but that's right. Around here, we like that. But it's so pristine, and because obviously this is a national wildlife refuge, and it's a secure area, there's so much solitude out there. It's so isolated, and it's so natural.
Those sea oats waving in the breeze between the beach and the beach house. My parents had a place just a little bit further up the coast here, so same kind of familiar coastline, and my mom was always commenting on the sea oats and how beautiful they were, and it's so nice to keep all those natural elements. So if they don't get a chance to go out there and relax, and maybe they can use those images that they had when they were out there earlier this week and get into a relaxing kind of state of mind. That's the one thing about the ocean, right? There's always just something so relaxing about looking at the water.
It is so true. Peace and tranquility. It's hard to not have that wash over you when you're out there gazing over the ocean. And that is just what the doctor ordered when crews are tired from a long day of launch operations and preparations. But we don't know if that's where they're headed at this time. We should caveat, because the decision has yet to be made about when the next opportunity will be, whether or not there will be some work that's required, or whether or not they have enough data to move forward with flight rationale. Of course, we'll have updates for you. Stay tuned to our social media channels as we drive by the other direction, away from the vehicle assembly building and right by our studios here at the Launch 39 complex. If you were commander of this crew, what would you do?
What would I do with the free time? I think I would try to do what I was saying earlier, really use it to relax, because I know myself, and as I was mentioning, I've heard a lot of reports from the crews being pretty busy up until the last moment. So I think I would sort of take advantage of the fact that all of those annoying things are done, and perhaps you choose not to look at your email again, not to get back on your phone at all, because you've already sort of disconnected from those devices. I know for me, when my happy place is in nature, going camping and hiking, and when I am on a long trip without any technology, without my cell phone, I find it to be incredibly invigorating, and can get a lot of recuperation out
And
something
liberating.
like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I would probably not be in any rush to turn my phone back on. And that's the other thing, things are pretty planned. Like you said, we don't know for sure when the next attempt will be, but there certainly will be a plan, and they have to remain, of course, in their quarantine. So I would probably just try to relax, maybe avoid technology, and see how it all plays out. Could be some great crew bonding opportunities, I think, for them.
You're watching the crew from NASA SpaceX's Crew-10 making their way back to astronaut crew quarters at the ONC. It's about a 20-minute drive from the launch pad to the crew quarters. The caravan going down NASA Causeway. They came in on 2 lanes. They're going out on 3 lanes. Those 3 lanes are to accommodate big, heavy space hardware when it travels around the Kennedy Space Center. Fun little fact.
Certainly a great time of year to be launching, though. This weather has been phenomenal, and it's so pleasant to just be outside, which is not always the case here in Florida.
Yeah, you were asking me, prior to coming out here, like, how's the weather? I'm like, oh man, it's so good from our previous launch coverage that you and I did, Crew-7. First of all, it was overnight.
Yep.
Second of all, we were outside. I believe bugs were a factor.
Yes.
Collecting quite a few of them on the on the launch desk. But yeah, outside now, it's just, this is why people vacation this time of year. It's the high season for Florida. This is the place to be, because we have just about 6 to 7 months of summer every year. So I cherish these days in February and March.
Yeah, we know how that feels in Houston, too.
Oh, yes, you do.
We've been pretty fortunate with the weather there lately as well. Hopefully the friends and family that are here as well will be able to stick around for a little while and see what's going to happen. That's always something, when we have these constant changes that can kind of become a stressor for us, is that it's difficult for people to change their schedules and their time off work to be here. So we always feel for that. And I know that happened once already with the change that they had moving off of the February plan. So see how it all works, but we will be here supporting them, and our colleagues at NASA are in it until the end for sure. So we're here to support them all the way and send them off eventually to space.
100%.
Feel like we're in the car right there with them with this view, don't we?
And we are. I wonder if they're putting in their order to the fine cooks and chefs at crew quarters for dinner tonight, because it's been a while since they ate.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably that will be definitely a bright spot on the horizon, because their meals in Dragon, there's no way to heat up the food. So it has to be something, you do get some choice in what you can bring along. You can use you can bring along some of the elements of our standard food menu that we have on ISS and some other kind of off-the-shelf varieties as well. But there's no way to heat it, so you have to have something that tastes good at the ambient temperature. So at least they will have a hot meal tonight, which they wouldn't have had otherwise on Dragon.
Absolutely.
A little bit less fun when your food's not floating, though, I have to say.
There is that fun factor.
Absolutely.
It's room temperature, but capturing it out of midair.
Yeah, it's okay to play with your food in space. Don't tell your kids.
Right. That's not something that you and I, as parents of toddlers, are currently doing.
Yeah, exactly. It would be a different ballgame with a toddler if all of the food was floating. Oh, imagine that.
Can you imagine that? Wouldn't that be like such an impetus to get them to eat?
Toddlers in space would be cute, but very messy.
Oh, no doubt about that.
Well, I know that would be top on my list when you asked what I would be doing if I were the commander and had a scrub. And that would be definitely some squeezing and cuddling of my toddler.
No doubt. You've got a young one at a precious age, as do I. Enjoying every moment of that.
I assume it would get a little confusing for them, though.
Yeah, I know, right. Especially at that age where, it's difficult to completely understand what your mom or dad is saying. Well, we have arrived back where we started, at astronaut crew quarters, as the gull-wing doors open up. And there you see our Crew-10 crew members, waving to somebody who's out there.
Yep. Looking slightly less enthusiastic.
Slightly less. But that's okay. They will fly eventually. This we know. It's just a matter of figuring out when, as they hustle into the doors. Well, folks, that's going to do it for us today. We really appreciate you joining us for this launch attempt of NASA and SpaceX's Crew-10 launch to the International Space Station. Thank you so much, Jessica, for being here with us on this first attempt. You'll be with us on the next one. We greatly appreciate that as well.
Yeah, thank you. It is a pleasure, really an honor to be here supporting my colleagues on their journey to space. And this is all just part of the journey. Everyone's is different.
Absolutely. Just to recap really quickly, we had an issue with some ground equipment, the hydraulic equipment that controls the clamp arms on the Falcon 9 transporter erector, holds the rocket to the pad. It releases at about 4.5 minutes. There was an issue, and they're going to look at that, look at the data, and then decide whether or not to have some work to do or maybe some further data reviews before they decide on a launch date. So make sure you stay tuned to updates that we will have for you. Just head to nasa.gov/blogs/Crew-10. You see it at the bottom of your screen there. We'll have all the information you need to know once we have that available on the next launch attempt. For everybody here at NASA and SpaceX, I'm Daryl Nail for Jessica Muir. We'll see you next time.
बड़ी कंपनीज के साथ काम करना मेरे बचपन का सपना था और ये इंटर्नशिप मुझे उस सपने की तरफ पहला कदम बढ़ाने का अवसर देती है। इस अवसर को पाकर मैं बहुत खुश हूँ।
मैं इस इंटर्नशिप को अपने करियर का एक महत्वपूर्ण मोड़ मानता हूँ। इस अनुभव से जितना हो सके मैं सीखूंगा और नए लोगों से भी मिलूंगा।
आज कई युवा अपनी काबिलियत के दम पर टॉप कंपनियों में इंटर्नशिप के लिए ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं, सफलता के सफर पर निकल रहे हैं। अगर आप भी चयनित युवाओं में से एक हैं, तो जल्द ही अपनी दी हुई इंटर्नशिप की लोकेशंस पर पहुंचें और एक उज्जवल कल की ओर बढ़ें। प्रधानमंत्री इंटर्नशिप स्कीम, आपके सपनों की उड़ान। लर्न फ्रॉम द बेस्ट। अधिक जानकारी के लिए विजिट करें www.pminternship.mca.gov.in या टोल फ्री नंबर पर कॉल करें 1800-116-090।
आम्ही शेंगदाणे विकतो, आमची अक्कल नाही। हा मेसेज बघा, म्हणतात लॉटरी लागली आहे, लिंक क्लिक करून UPI पिन टाका, पैसे मिळतील। अरे आम्हाला माहिती नाही आहे का? इकडे UPI पिन टाकला, तिकडे पैसे गायब। मी शेंगदाणेवाला आहे, मूर्ख नाही आहे। लक्षात ठेवा, UPI सांगतं जर कोणी आमिष दाखवलं तर त्यांना सांगा मी मूर्ख नाही आहे।
Attempt. For everybody here at NASA and SpaceX, I'm Daryl Nail for Jessica Meir.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with me today is Mr. John Lowry, who's one of my colleagues from my office, who's been a big help to me. Mr. President, as you know, when Vice President Harris and President Trump ran against each other for the presidency, one of the planks in President Trump's platform was that he was going to review every penny of federal government spending. Why did he say that? Why did he promise to do that? Well, first, there's a moral principle involved. People worked hard for their money, and when they give it to government, they're entitled to expect government to spend it efficiently. Number two, President Trump ran on that plank because of our debt. The federal debt is $36.5 trillion. You know, we throw these numbers around like a trillion, you know, we start to take them for granted. To give you a little perspective, this $36.5 trillion, it grows bigger by the second. It's going to increase. If we just keep doing what we've been doing, it's going to increase $1 trillion every 100 days. If we just keep doing what we've been doing, it's going to increase $10 billion a day. Today, nothing changed. We added $10 billion in debt. That's also $417 million an hour. That's $6.9 million a minute. I think I've been talking about a minute. We just added $7 million to our debt. That's why the president wants to get rid of spending porn. The reaction here in Washington, Mr. President, has been breathtaking. I understand Washington is not exactly a slice of America. I get that. I understand that Washington is not normal. Normal in Washington, D.C. is a setting on the dryer. So I get all that. We're different in Washington.